Hey everyone, in today's video, I wanted to give you a couple of tips on how I paint hair digitally, but I mean you could apply these tips to your traditional drawings if you wanted to. I've talked about how I paint and draw hair before, so there's a couple of videos on my channel somewhere about that topic, but I thought it would be a good idea to make an updated video because my style and techniques have changed a tiny bit, and while those videos could still be helpful, I wanted to talk about how I currently will paint hair in Photoshop. You can use Krita if you want to. I'm currently working in Photoshop just because I've been used to using the Creative Cloud for school and just for design in general. So Photoshop is very easy for me to use currently, but you can use Krita if you want to. It's a free digital painting software and I definitely recommend it. I've used it for years. But if you're interested in my 5 tips on how to paint hair, keep on watching. First off, I wanted to say thank you so much to Skillshare for sponsoring this video. Skillshare is an online learning community for creatives where millions come together to take the next step in their creative journey. There's thousands of classes on topics including illustration, design, photography, video freelancing, and more. A variety of classes for beginners, pros, whatever skill level that you are, and they come with a combination of video lessons and a class project. Classes are made to fit your schedule and skill level, so you don't have to commit a crazy amount of time to learning a new topic. Most classes are under 60 minutes with short lessons to fit any schedule. You can get direct feedback from the instructor, and most of these instructors are professionals who've worked in the field and really know what they're talking about. One class that I definitely recommend to you is portrait photography, shoot and edit Instagram-worthy shots, which is taught by Jessica Kobesi. She's one of my favorite YouTubers, and I just love that a ton of insanely impressive YouTubers have switched over to creating Skillshare classes. So if you're interested in checking that out, I will have the link for that specific class down in the description. The best thing about Skillshare is that it's curated specifically for learning. There's no ads. With an annual subscription, it's less than $10 a month. If you're interested in trying out Skillshare, the first 1,000 of my subscribers to click the link in the description will get a free trial of premium membership so that you can explore your creativity. I love Skillshare. I recommend it to anybody, and I've been using it for years now. So if you're interested in it, it's going to be linked down in the description. Thank you so much to them for sponsoring this video. Let's talk about my first tip, which I'm going to start from the beginning of the sketching process to the end where you add your details and precision. First off, my first tip is to use sweeping lines when drawing the hair. I get a lot of comments about how a lot of my drawings have a lot of life to them, like a lot of bounce and movement, and my first tip is to add sweeping lines. Even with straight hair, try to add some natural curves to those lines to make them look a little bit more bouncy and alive. Adding sweeping curves to the hair makes it look more dynamic, as if it's in movement, if there's wind. Even if it's super like pin straight hair, try to add one sweeping curve to that line. If you're digitally painting, it's easier to zoom out when you're drawing these lines so that you can get a really smooth sweeping motion with your arm. When you're drawing traditionally, try to keep your wrist locked and try to move your entire arm from your elbow. Don't try to make that sweeping movement with your wrist because it's just better drawing technique to use your elbow. It's better on your wrists, and you'll have like a beautiful crisp line when you do work with your elbows instead of your wrists. My second tip is to think of the different nuances and tones in the hair. No hair is just one single tone. Like the worst hair colors that you ever see are like the crazy box dyes that are just one flat tone. When you look at some really nice hair, you see a bunch of different highlights and tonalities and hues in the hair that make it look so vibrant and full. So when you're painting hair, like laying down your base colors, shift the hue of the color when you are adding highlights and shadows to make the hair look more dimensional. Tone is one of the most important things to keep in mind when you're creating a piece that stands out. This includes when you're adding different colors to the face, eyes, lips, hair, clothing, any part of the painting process. Shifting your hue and your tone when you're adding shadows and highlights is one of the things that will just make your painting stand out. If you use the exact same hue or tone, you are going to have very flat looking hair, it'll look monochromatic. So I definitely recommend steering away from that. For this piece, I had more orangey highlights, more reddish brown undertones for the shadows. So keep in mind the different hues that you want to add to that piece. And so to go along with that, my third tip is that when you add these base colors, use a fluffy, soft, round brush Adding the initial colors and tones with a fluffy brush will make blending and adding detail later a lot easier. This also goes for any part of the painting process, including the face. If you want to have smooth blending, I definitely recommend using a fluffy airbrush to add those initial colors under your sketch layer. By using a soft brush, you'll make the hair look a lot silkier, and you're going to make the whole blending process later when you are adding details. It'll make it a lot easier, because when you're adding those details, you won't really have to worry about creating a smooth gradient and blend to the hair from the lights and the shadows. You'll more think about adding the specific strands of hair. With any of my paintings, I recommend when you are adding those base colors, use a soft fluffy brush to add all of your colors and your tones. It's going to make the detailing later so much easier on you. You're just going to be focused on creating sharp edges rather than blending. My fourth tip is to think of the hair as it is made up of large chunks, then break those chunks up into smaller chunks. Add strands of hair deliberately when you're finished with a section of hair. Don't really think about the hair in terms of strands. If you're good at painting, is you're going to create a hyper-realistic head of hair, which if that's the look you're going for, that's great. But I'm assuming if you follow me and you're asking for my tips, you're definitely not working in a hyper-realistic fashion. You're kind of working in a more stylized way. And so you have to simplify that hair into blocks and shapes. Thinking of hair in like these big curving sheets rather than individual strands will help you to add like nicer highlights and shadows to the hair. And then once you're satisfied with the basic shape of that hair, you can go in and use a smaller brush to add in some hair strokes and details. This is definitely stylized, so again, if you're going for a hyper-realistic look, you might want to use the tips that I've said until now, but then go in with individual hair strands. And I used to paint hair with so many strands where like that was the focus of when I was painting. I would paint like every individual strand, and with my stylized look to my paintings, it didn't match super well because it was so detailed in an unnecessary way. And when you think of hair in that fashion, you're going to have to add highlights and shadows to every single individual strand of hair. It's going to take so much longer. So if you work in those chunks and then narrow down to add those details later, it's going to make the painting process a lot quicker. A lot of these tips are on, maybe you could paint hair very well, but it takes you a crazy amount of time. These are tips that I've learned to make that painting process so much quicker and less stressful, because painting hair can be a boring thing to do. I personally love painting faces, and in this piece I spent less time painting the face and a lot more time painting the hair, and I definitely thought this was going to be a good piece to showcase how I do paint hair because I spent so much time on it. If you want to see the real-time process to this piece, it's going to be on my Patreon, linked down in the description. You can see the real time of how I paint every single individual block of hair, choose my colors, paint the different strands. If you're interested, it's going to be linked down in the description. I have a ton of tutorials and personal life updates on my Patreon if you would like to support me further, but that's just if you see the sped up version and you kind of want to see a little bit more in depth about the specific color picking that I do and which brushes and what sizes that I use. Just seeing my painting process in real time might be helpful for this particular video and topic. My last tip is to use a round brush in all of this. So when you are adding the details, use a round oil type of brush. You've seen the kind of brushes that I really like, round brushes with like a little bit of a edge to them so it looks like a paintbrush. I would recommend this from using any kind of like oblong or rectangular shaped brush, just because those are going to be a little bit harsher and they're not going to blend as well as a round brush. You can definitely use a different shape of brush if you're going for a different style, like less smooth, a little bit more choppy. But if you're going for this smooth blending with the kind of detail that I have in my pieces, it's going to be really hard to use one of those brushes. I have in the past and it's just frustrating. So I don't recommend a brush that is not round and kind of feathered at the ends, that it looks like kind of an oil brush or a paintbrush in real life. I spoke so quickly in this video. I just had a couple of tips. Bonus tip, add tons of highlights, like add the rim lights in the back of the hair the way that I did it in this piece, taking the background color, which is like this dark blue, adding a ton of brightness to it on that color wheel, so going to like the lightest shade of that blue, and then using a light opacity over that hair color, so in this case this really pretty copper color, and then when you use that light blue at a low opacity on the hair, it's going to create a very natural mix of the two colors. Color pick that color that you've created, that's the blend of the lighter blue color with this like copper tone, and then you can use that on a harder opacity to create that rim light. I hope that made any sense to you, but that's how I create rim light. It's less of a harsh way to add rim light to your pieces instead of using a super bright color that would be contrasted. I love adding a ton of adjustment layers on top. Use overlay, soft light, hard light, whatever you want to. Mess around with different colors on the color wheel, using a soft airbrush on top of your hair, changing the opacity on that. Play around with Photoshop. It's super, or Krita, whatever you're using, or GIMP, whatever painting program you're using, play around with the adjustment layers and come up with something that works with your workflow, that works with your style. What I do is I add tons of overlay and soft light layers to my finished pieces. Use curves in the end, use the hue, saturation, and lightness sliders, play around with Photoshop. If you want a more detailed tutorial, this is just like my tips. If you want a tutorial on how I do it step by step, please let me know. Like this video so that I know that you enjoy these kinds of videos where I give practical tips on how to digitally paint. That would really help me out for me to see that you enjoy this type of video. Leave a comment down below to let me know. If you'd like to see that tutorial, I can say it as a very manageable goal that once I graduate in May, I will be able to put out more tutorial-y type videos. If you want a tiny little life update, if you don't see me posting a ton on Instagram or on YouTube, it's just because I'm in my last semester currently. I'm finishing up all of my classes. I'm doing an internship, a practicum, and with my college, I have to do like community service. And by some stroke of unluck, I have 3 semesters of community service that I have to be working on alongside freelance work that I do here in person with people that I know. So if you don't see me posting on Instagram, just know that I'm not dead. I'm just super busy, and I am going to be back for sure, constantly posting in May when I do graduate. But in the meantime, bear with me while I am navigating all of this stuff and emotions. You know how it be. I will talk to you guys in my next video, which is coming soon. Subscribe because I do post relatively regularly every 1 to 2 weeks. I would say every week and a half I have a new video up. So if you're interested in learning more from my process and seeing more of these types of videos, subscribe for more content. I appreciate you so much. Thank you for being here. Have a great rest of your day. Bye.